It's one of history's most chilling questions. How can a modern, educated nation just give up its freedom and fall into the hands of a dictator? Today, we're going to break down exactly how it happened. We'll look at the step-by-step process Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party used to tear down a democracy and build a dictatorship in its place. If you want to understand what's coming, you have to start right here with this quote from 1922. This is the key. You can feel the resentment just boiling off the page, right? Germany after World War I felt humiliated, crushed. And Hitler, he didn't just feel that anger. He knew how to amplify it, how to frame Germany as this helpless victim, an enslaved colony. And that feeling, that deep national wound, was the perfect soil for what was about to grow. So to really get how this terrifying change happened, we're going to walk through it in 6 key stages. We'll start with the man, Hitler himself, and follow the path all the way to the complete Nazi takeover of German life. First up, let's talk about Hitler, the man. What's interesting is he wasn't even born in Germany. He was Austrian. He dreamed of being an artist, but he failed at that. Then he fought in World War I, and his experiences in the trenches, combined with Germany's final, shocking defeat, well, that's what really forged the man he would become. It was during this time, in Vienna and right after the war, that this really toxic brew of ideas started to come together in his mind. It all boiled down to 4 main things. First, this intense, aggressive German nationalism. Second, a vicious, deep-seated racism, especially aimed at Jewish people. Third, this twisted idea of social Darwinism, the belief that life is just a brutal struggle where only the strongest races deserve to survive and rule. And finally, he had this chillingly modern understanding of how to use propaganda and raw terror to control people. So, armed with these ideas, Hitler didn't just start a movement out of nothing. No, he was smarter than that. He found a tiny, insignificant little right-wing party in Munich and basically took it over from the inside. He gave it a new name, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or as we know it, the Nazi Party. And that name, you have to admit, was a work of manipulative genius. It had something for everyone. Nationalist for the patriots, socialist and workers for the working class. By 1921, he was in total command, and he even had his own private army, the SA, or stormtroops, in their brown shirts to bash heads and intimidate anyone who got in their way. Now, at first, he thought he could just take power by force. In 1923, he tried with something called the Beer Hall Putsch. It was an absolute fiasco. He was arrested, thrown in jail, but here's the thing. That failure taught him the most important lesson of his life. He realized you don't overthrow a modern state with a mob. No, the path to power was through the ballot box. He was going to use democracy to kill democracy. And his time in prison, it wasn't wasted. That's where he sat down and wrote his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And this wasn't just some prison diary. It was the actual blueprint for everything he planned to do. Right at the heart of Mein Kampf is this really dangerous idea called Lebensraum, which means living space. This was his justification for the wars he would later start. He basically argued that the so-called superior German race had a right to expand eastward, to take land, and to, remove or destroy the people who were already living there. But look, an ideology is just words in a book. What really opened the door for the Nazis was the Great Depression. The global economy crashed, and Germany was hit harder than almost anywhere. By the winter of 1932, a staggering 5.5 million Germans were out of work. And that's not just a statistic. That's a nation full of people who are desperate, hungry, and terrified. And right into that chaos, Hitler stepped up and promised them jobs, food, and, most importantly, a return to national greatness. And that widespread desperation led to a political mistake of epic proportions. The old-school conservative elites in Germany, the rich industrialists, the military leaders, they looked at Hitler and his screaming crowds and they thought, hey, we can use this guy. They figured they could control him, use his popularity for their own goals. It was one of the worst miscalculations in history. Once he got his foot in the door, the speed of the takeover was just breathtaking. Look at this timeline. In January 33, he's made chancellor. Just 2 months later, the German parliament basically votes to give him dictatorial powers. By that summer, every other political party is illegal. And then a year later, the president dies, and Hitler just combines the jobs of president and chancellor. He's now the absolute ruler, the Führer. It happened so fast. The moment democracy truly died was with this thing called the Enabling Act. Think about this. The The German parliament, the Reichstag, voted to give Hitler the power to make laws without them, to completely ignore the Constitution. Now, they did this under extreme intimidation, with his stormtroopers everywhere, but they still did it. He was now a dictator, but with a piece of paper that made it all look perfectly legal.
So, once he had that absolute power, Hitler immediately started to build a totalitarian state. And what that means is a society where there's no difference between the government, the party, and the state. It's all one machine that controls every single part of your life.
And the whole goal of this new state was to create what he called an Aryan racial empire. Now, we have to be clear. The term Aryan originally refers to a language group. The Nazis completely hijacked it and twisted it into a made-up racial category for what they considered a master race that was destined to rule the world. And how did they keep this new state in line? Well, mainly through one thing: pure terror. The main weapon of that terror was the SS. Led by the absolutely fanatical Heinrich Himmler, the SS was way more than just Hitler's bodyguard. It became this state within a state. They controlled all the police, they ran the concentration camps, and they made sure everyone was kept in line through constant, chilling fear. Okay, so you have political control locked down through terror. The next step was even more ambitious: to completely re-engineer German society from the ground up, telling people how to live, who to love, and, most importantly, who to hate. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It wasn't just fear that kept people in line. The Nazis actually delivered on their economic promises. They started huge public works projects, they secretly started building up the military again, and unemployment plummeted. It went from over 5 million to less than 500,000. For a lot of ordinary Germans, it felt like a miracle, and that made it a whole lot easier to ignore the ugly side of the regime. And at the exact same time, the regime began its cold, calculated legal attack on Germany's Jewish population. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 made racism the law of the land. They legally defined who was a Jew, they stripped them of their citizenship, their rights, and they made it illegal for them to even marry other Germans. Overnight, your neighbors, your friends, they were legally made into outcasts. And then, in November 1938, all that legal persecution exploded into open, brutal violence. On Kristallnacht, the night of shattered glass, Nazi thugs went on a rampage. This wasn't a riot. It was an organized pogrom. They burned synagogues, smashed Jewish-owned businesses, and rounded up thousands of Jewish men to be sent to concentration camps. This was the moment the mask came completely off. So you've got control of politics, the economy, and the law. What's the last piece of the totalitarian puzzle? Complete control over what people think, read, and see. As Hitler himself said, there are no longer any free realms in which the individual belongs to himself. And this is how they made that happen. The propaganda machine run by Joseph Goebbels was ruthlessly brilliant. First, the radio. They made sure cheap radios were available to everyone, so they could pump Hitler's speeches and Nazi messaging directly into every German living room. Second, film. Goebbels created an entire film department to make movies that looked like entertainment, but were secretly pushing the Nazi agenda. And third, they even controlled what you did in your free time. The Strength Through Joy program organized vacations and concerts and sports, making sure that even when you were relaxing, you were still part of the Nazi collective. The absolute peak of their propaganda effort was supposed to be the 1936 Berlin Olympics. This was their chance to show the whole world the glory and superiority of the Aryan race. But history had a funny little twist in store. A Black American athlete named Jesse Owens showed up and won 4 gold medals, basically shattering Hitler's racist myths right in front of the entire world. And all of this brings us to one final, really important question that's just as relevant today as it was then. The story of Nazi Germany is a terrifying one, but we have to learn from it. It really makes you wonder, how much are people willing to give up when they're scared? When someone promises to fix all the problems and make the country strong again, at what point does a society decide that its freedom is a price worth paying? It's something we should all think about.